Mr. Speaker.
Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continued help, that on all our works begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally, by thy mercy, attain everlasting life. Amen. Introduction of guests. Recognize the Minister of Crown Investments Corporation.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to you and through you, I'm delighted to introduce to the Assembly 19 public servants who are seated in your gallery. They're here as a part of the parliamentary program for the public service. As a part of this program, they'll have an opportunity to tour the building. They'll have briefings presented by various branches of Legislative Assembly Services and Executive Council. They're here for watching proceedings, including question period, and I'll have an opportunity to meet with them. I believe you as well, Will, and a member of the opposition. Mr. Speaker, we have participants from the following ministries: Agriculture, Education, Energy and Resources, Environment, Executive Council, Finance, Government Relations, Health, SAS Builds and Procurement, Social Services, and the Legislative Assembly Service. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the government, it's a pleasure to welcome them, but more importantly, it's a pleasure to thank these members of the public service, as well as all those that work diligently each and every day to provide services to the people of Saskatchewan. So with that, I would ask all members to join with me in welcoming these public servants to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you and to all members, I'd like to join with the Minister opposite in welcoming these remarkable public servants to their legislature. On behalf of the official opposition, I look forward to meeting with you and answering any questions that you have about the heady world of opposition and our roles here. And I'd like to add our thanks and appreciation for the work that you do, the interest that you show in the legislative proceedings here today, as well as the service that you provide to this magnificent province each and every day. So on behalf of the opposition, we'd like to add our thanks and ask all members to join me in welcoming these folks again to their legislature.
You're here. Recognize the member from Saskatchewan Rivers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, seated in the East Gallery is Mr. John Romick. John is an executor who has worked in Saskatchewan's energy sector since graduating from the University of Regina in petroleum engineering. He is a business leader, a father of 4 children, resident of Lumsden, and deputy leader of Saskatchewan United Party. Please join me in welcoming John to his assembly.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Westview.
Mr. Speaker, to you and through you, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce some hardworking individuals who are seated in your gallery. If you'd like to give me a wave, Carrie Peterson, Jay Gadula, Ria Garcia, Greg Matheson, and Kyle Miners. Carrie and I went to school together, and our farms were only a few miles apart, but I can assure you we were on different hockey teams. And had a lot of fun with Kerry back in the day, and like to welcome all of his delegation here today to this Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member from Arm River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to welcome and introduce a constituent of mine seated behind the bar, just behind me here. A constituent that really needs no introduction to this House, Mr. Greg Burkich. Certainly, Greg is no stranger to this Assembly, having served as an MLA for 16 years, as you would well know, and is my predecessor in the constituency of Arm River. I know that during his time, during his 16 years, that he very much enjoyed and appreciated, maybe wasn't appreciated, but appreciated his time here in the chamber. And so with that, I'd ask all members to join me in welcoming Greg back to his legislature.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to join in welcoming Greg Burkich back to the Legislative Assembly on behalf of the official opposition. I also had the pleasure of serving with Greg, and I want to thank him for all of his service to the province of Saskatchewan, and assure him that his successor wears better suits than he did, which is probably no surprise to anyone here. We'll see about whoever's next. But I do want to thank him for his service. It is quite something to be an MLA, to serve in this space, and for the amount of time that you served, thank you for that, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Willow Grove.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you and to all members of the Assembly, I'd like to introduce somebody certainly who doesn't need much of an introduction, but is a good friend to members on both sides of the House. Rob Norris, somebody who's made a contribution provincially as a cabinet minister, as an MLA, civically in the city of Saskatoon, and certainly a friend to First Nations and Métis and newcomers to our province as well. Rob is the new CEO of the Pine House Power Authority in northern Saskatchewan, something that I know he is very excited about and sees as a great challenge. So we wish you well, and I ask all members to help welcome former member, the Honourable Rob Norris, to his Legislative Assembly.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't see Rob Norris when I first stood up, but I do want to join in welcoming him back to his legislature as well, Mr. Speaker. I first had the opportunity to meet Rob Norris when he was the parent of one of my cadets a long time ago. It feels like lifetimes ago, Mr. Speaker. And we, built a relationship there, and have since, stayed in touch with his work at the synchrotron. Wish him all the best in his future endeavors, and ask everyone to join me in welcoming him to his assembly today.
Recognize a member from the Saskatchewan Rivers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I would also like to express my appreciation for the two sitting MLAs, former MLAs, Rob Norris and Greg Burkich. Greg was just at my fundraiser, and so I'm really happy to see him here in support of me. You should be home calving, I understand, but some things take precedent. So thank you very much. Please join me in appreciation of the two MLAs and their government.
Presenting petitions, I recognize the member from Kenora-Pelly.
We, the undersigned residents of the province of Saskatchewan, wish to bring to your attention the following. Whereas the Trudeau Liberal NDP coalition carbon tax is one of the main causes of affordability issues and inflation in the nation of Canada, that the federal Liberal NDP government was politically motivated in issuing a carve-out for home heating oil, and that the government of Saskatchewan's decision not to collect and remit the carbon tax on home heating in Saskatchewan has led to a drop in inflation. Further, that despite the decision not to charge the carbon tax on home heating, Saskatchewan families continue to pay that tax out of the pocket for the pumps, grocery stores, and more. We in the prayer reads as follows: respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan take the following action. To call upon the Government of Canada to immediately suspend the carbon tax across the nation of Canada and acknowledge its significant impact on the affordability inflation in Canada. The The below undersigned are residents of Yorkton. I do so submit.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present a petition to the Government of Saskatchewan to open up vacant Sask housing units for occupancy. Hear, hear. We know that there are 3,000 Sask housing units that are currently vacant across Saskatchewan, including over 100 units in Prince Albert, close to 300 in Saskatoon, and 700 in Regina, Mr. Speaker. Some of these units require renovation, but the Sask Party government has cut the maintenance and renovation budget by approximately 40% over the last decade and failed to invest in housing stock.
Take care of the people.
And we also know that the province's expenditures on emergency hotels, which have risen year over year, is one example of the cost of the Sask Party government's failure to maintain the public housing stock. I'll read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to renovate Sask housing units that require renovation, make units available and affordable, and ensure that all the currently vacant Sask housing units are occupied by October 2024. These are signed by individuals from Regina. Today, Mr. Speaker, I do so present.
Recognize the member from Regina Coronation Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present our petition calling on the government to address the affordability crisis. We, the undersigned resident of the province of Saskatchewan, wish to bring it to your attention the following. The inflation is the highest it has been more than 3 decades. That's half of the Saskatchewan resident, including Regina Coronation Park constituency, where the living prices or the living cost was paycheck to paycheck before transportation and the food costs skyrocketed in 2022. That the Sask Party government 32 new taxes and the fee hikes makes life more expensive and unaffordable, all while harming struggling industries like tourism, culture, fitness, overall small businesses. While other provinces acted, the Sask Party government ignored the opposition call for a gas price relief plan. We, in the prayer that read as follows, respectfully request the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan to call on the Government of Saskatchewan to meaningfully address the affordability crisis in Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, the signatory of these petitions reside in Regina, so I do present.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I'm on my feet to present a petition calling on the Sask Party government to address the housing crisis in Saskatchewan and calling for more affordable homes and tenant protections. Mr. Speaker, the cost of housing across Saskatchewan has absolutely skyrocketed, making it difficult for residents to locate affordable, stable housing. Over the past decade, we've seen homelessness surge under this government, pushing people onto the streets. Meanwhile, the government has made drastic cuts to housing programs. This government of Saskatchewan is wasting nearly $600 million on vacant housing units across the province. Some of these remain uninhabitable due to the fact that they have cut the maintenance and renovation budget for public housing more than 40% in the last decade. Vacancy rates are unimaginably low right now, Mr. Speaker, and the status quo without more supports for people is not sustainable. Monthly rent prices in Saskatchewan have significantly increased, and we're seeing more and more people struggle. Mr. Speaker, I'll read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to immediately implement a comprehensive affordable housing strategy aimed at helping individuals and families securing stable and affordable housing. Mr. Speaker, the signatories of this petition reside in Saskatoon. I do so present.
Reading and receiving petitions, statements by members. I recognize the member from Cypress Hills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today marks the first day of the 2024 SARM Annual Convention. 119 years strong, this organization. This event gives us the opportunity to listen and discuss concerns, feedback, and roughly 2,000 delegates from across Saskatchewan will be taking part. We recognize the importance of rural voices in our province, and we look forward to continuing to build these strong relationships. The value of working with our rural communities do for this province cannot be understated. Our government will be available through meetings, dialogue sessions, and ministries and bear pits, which gives members direct access to the Premier and Cabinet, allowing government to gain deeper understandings and priorities of rural Saskatchewan. Whether discussion is about agriculture, highways, public safety, or others in between, we know Saskatchewan 296 rural municipalities are well represented by these elected members. Our government looks forward to continuing to work with SARM to provide results for the residents of rural Saskatchewan. I ask the members to join me in thanking SARM, its President Ray Orb, and all of the staff involved in contributing to this year's annual convention. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Regina Douglas Park.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to highlight Camp Molly, a female-led firefighting camp for girls and non-binary youth to learn the ins and outs of the career. Camp Molly pays tribute to Molly Williams, the first female firefighter on record in North America. In 2019, the fire departments of Halton Region hosted the inaugural Camp Molly, and in 2024, Camp Molly comes to Saskatchewan twice. First, June 6th to 9th in White City, with registration open from February 21st till April 6th. The second offering will be Indigenous-focused and held in Prince Albert from June 13th to 16th. Nice. Registration closes April 13th. In Camp Molly, girls and non-binary youth from the ages of 15 to 18 can expect to learn and partake in activities such as fire suppression, auto-extrication, communications, fire prevention, fire investigations, public education, media relations, medical, forcible entry, and firefighter survival. Mr. Speaker, what an incredible opportunity, and entirely free. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me in thanking all of the strong female role models, the volunteers, and the generous donors who make Camp Molly possible. Here.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Riversdale.
It's another great day in Riversdale, Mr. Speaker. Here. Today I recognize the life-saving work of dedicated Saskatoon residents. Mr. Speaker, the WOW Bus does great work in Riversdale and the inner city. The Warehouse Church in Saskatoon's inner city leased a bus to help feed and clothe the people on the streets of Saskatoon's core neighbourhoods. This bus has since been donated to the church to continue the great work they have started. Good job. Community residents and community-based organizations have been incredibly supportive, Mr. Speaker, donating clothing, food, and blankets. Local businesses like Prairie Meats, Village Green, and Save On Foods are only few of many great organizations that help make this happen. Kevin Dole, the pastor of the church, and my sister, Val Penner, and her team are very community-focused and run the operation, serving from 75 to in excess of 100 people per evening. Sometimes this bus is in place to warm up, have a coffee, a bowl of soup, or a sandwich, and sometimes people are in need of a blanket, clothing, or even given a ride to church on Sundays. The bus is in operation Saturdays and Mondays from 5 to 9 or until food runs out. This bus is parked at City Centre Church on 20th Street West. Mr. Speaker, words are not enough to express how thankful the City of Saskatoon is to this great group of volunteers doing such important work in our inner city. Please join me in thanking the WOW Bus and their team. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Regina Wall Shakers.
Mr. Speaker, it is my honour to rise today to recognize the Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation and congratulate them on a successful 95th annual convention in Saskatoon in February. I had the pleasure of attending the convention and getting to connect with many folks from across the province who are passionate about wildlife and the outdoors. The agenda was robust, with sessions covering wildlife research and management, gun safety, Henry Kelsey updates, and so much more. Something that is truly impressive, though, is the parade of checks, where local branches present their donations to SWF in a big lineup. These donations help support the many conservation programs SWF administers across the province, and this year local branches donated over $250,000. Now, for all those gun enthusiasts out there in Saskatchewan, Sask Wildlife Federation currently has a Quigley rifle raffle and 50-50 draw fundraiser happening now, so get your tickets. The SWS was established in 1929 and is a non-profit, non-governmental, charitable organization of over 32,000 members in 125 branches. Now, SWF's vision statement resonates deeply with me as a proud member, a parent, and a critic for the environment. to ensure the wildlife legacy we leave to our children surpasses that with which we inherited. I ask all members of this Legislative Assembly to congratulate the Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation on their 95th annual convention and their continued stewardship of Saskatchewan's natural environment. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon, Churchill-Wildwood.
Mr. Speaker, I had the pleasure of joining the Premier and several colleagues yesterday at the 2024 Indigenous Business Gathering in Saskatoon, hosted by the Ministry of Trade and Export Development. The event brought together both Indigenous and non-Indigenous businesses, Crown corporations, and municipalities from across Saskatchewan. Several key economic topics were discussed, including increasing procurement, supply chain, and joint venture opportunities for Indigenous-led businesses. The annual Indigenous Business Gathering has seen a greater number of attendees every year, and this year it featured more than 85 trade booths. Demand was a record high for the event, quickly selling out. This led to the venue being further expanded at the Prairieland Park World Trade Center. I would like to thank the over 700 attendees who helped make this year's gathering another great success. Supporting economic reconciliation is a priority for the Government of Saskatchewan and vital for the province's continued growth and prosperity. Indigenous businesses play a vital role in our province, providing new jobs, supporting local communities, and helping enrich our quality of life. Our government is pleased to sponsor events like this gathering, the largest of its kind, to bring together community leaders from every corner of the province. We look forward to welcoming even more attendees at next year's business gathering in 2025. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear.
Recognize a member from the Battlefords.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, here in the legislature, we often debate health care and how to improve services for Saskatchewan people. And we all know that to succeed, you need a plan. Now, we don't know what the NDP plan is, and I'm not even sure, Mr. Speaker, they know what the NDP plan is. But our government, Mr. Speaker, we have a plan, and we're proud of that plan. It's the Health Human Resources Action Plan, and its results is already showing in communities all around the province, Mr. Speaker. In my constituency, the Battlefords, Mr. Speaker, the action plan is showing some fantastic results with 68 positions, full-time positions filled because of our government's rural and remote recruitment incentive. 68 positions filled, Mr. Speaker. That is incredible progress in ensuring that the residents of my home community and the many smaller and Indigenous communities in our region can receive quality health care services close to home. Now, Mr. Speaker, out of the 68 full-time positions filled, the Battlefords are now home to an additional 29 registered nurses, 19 registered psychiatric nurses, 10 licensed practical nurses, 2 lab assistants, 6 lab techs, 1 radiation tech, and 1 nurse practitioner. Mr. Speaker, our government will continue to follow through on the Health Human Resources Action Plan to ensure that health care works for the people of the Battlefords and the people of Saskatchewan. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Martinsville-Warman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Premier, the Health Minister, and many colleagues joined me for an exciting announcement in the City of Warman. Mr. Speaker, communities like Warman and Martinsville continue to grow at a rapid pace, and we're continuing to plan and build for the future. That's why our government is piloting a new model for independently operated, publicly funded nurse practitioner clinics. These clinics will improve access to primary health care by providing a new avenue for patients. And to improve access to health care in rural and northern communities, 25 nurse practitioner positions will be created over the next year in the SHA. And the Ministry of Health is exploring further opportunities to expand the areas of services for nurse practitioners, including in settings other than primary care. On top of the $100 million investment into the HHR Action Plan, we've also made millions in investments to expand the Rural Physician Incentive Program to support the retention of rural physicians. And we've invested $1.3 million to hire 12 physician assistants. Mr. Speaker, this plan is working in tandem with other health care policies to ensure residents get the best health care possible. Aggressive targets, Mr. Speaker, ambitious plans, and results that work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question period. I recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government is failing to deliver when it comes to the cost of living for Saskatchewan people. They're not listening. If they were, they would know that this is by far the #1 issue for Saskatchewan people. New polling from Angus Reid today shows that cost of living is the #1 issue for people, and that 61% of Saskatchewan people think this Premier is doing a bad job or a terrible job of managing the issue. When will the Sask Party finally cut the fuel tax, listen for once, and provide some cost of living relief?
Recognize the Premier.
I would advise the Deputy Leader, and maybe for her to advise the Leader when she returns, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the fact that that exact poll also, Mr. Speaker, identified the Saskatchewan Party as the party best in this province to address affordability concerns that Saskatchewan residents have. Mr. Speaker, most certainly that is what this party has done over the last 17 years, is address those very concerns by reducing taxes in the province of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. In fact, removing 112,000 people off the tax rolls in this province altogether, Mr. Speaker. That's relative to the time under the members opposite when they had the honour to govern. Mr. Speaker, there are over $2 billion, and I've said this numerous times on the floor of this Assembly, there are over $2 billion in each and every budget, Mr. Speaker, that are specifically in there to address affordability measures for families from corner to corner to corner in the province of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. That includes up to that last year with the tax affordability checks, $500 that were set out to each and every family. That includes having some of the second lowest utility bundle in the nation of Canada, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and I would say that as our economy in this province continues to strengthen, you're going to see more investment into the classrooms in this province, into the health care in this province, Mr. Speaker, and most importantly, into the communities across the province.
Recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the poll shows that they're failing on cost of living and they're failing on health care. 2/3 of people say that this government is failing on health care. It's clear in the polls and it's clear in the headlines, like this one today from CTV, quote, "Woman robbed in Regina Hospital waiting room." People waiting in a waiting room have enough to worry about with long wait times and health care, Mr. Speaker. Now they have to worry about their own safety. It's unacceptable. How did the minister let things get so bad in our ERs that people are now being held up at knife point?
Recognize the Premier.
This is why you're seeing this government take a parallel approach when it comes to providing supports for those that may be struggling with mental health and addictions that often result, Mr. Speaker, in these kinds of violent activities, Mr. Speaker. And the other side of that approach is investing in our law enforcement agencies, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that those, Mr. Speaker, that are breaking the law in this province are being caught and are being held to account, Mr. Speaker. That's why you've seen this province invest heavily in the RCMP, our municipal police services, aligning the provincial law services, Mr. Speaker, and the new investment, Mr. Speaker, in the Saskatchewan Marshal Service, which is there to support those other law enforcement agencies, Mr. Speaker. They are going to build on and support the work of our warrant enforcement suppression team, Mr. Speaker. They are going to build on and work alongside our crime reduction teams in both the municipal and RCMP services, Mr. Speaker. And again, I would say through the strength of our economy in this province, we are able to make those investments. And if you wait just a few more days, Mr. Speaker, there's going to be a budget delivered on the floor of this Assembly, and I think you're going to see additional investments, not only in law enforcement in our communities, Mr. Speaker, but more broadly, substantial investments right directly into the communities where each Saskatchewan family lives.
Recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, they're not standing up for law enforcement. They're propping up a vanity project that they've created in this Marshal's force, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, people in Regina and Saskatoon have seen fire code violations in emergency rooms. And now, because of this tired and out-of-touch government's complete mismanagement of the healthcare system, we're seeing criminal code violations as well. This doesn't just impact patient safety, it's a workplace safety issue for healthcare workers. The Premier has been in office for 6 years. This is his record, and it's time for a change. Will the Premier finally accept some responsibility for the state of our healthcare system under his watch?
Recognize the Premier.
it's over not only the last 6 years, but the last 17 years that you have seen a commitment by this government, Mr. Speaker, to continuing to foster the growth of our economy so that we can invest into those very healthcare services that Saskatchewan people expect, to the tune of adding 1,000 doctors and over 5,000 nurses. Just this last year, Mr. Speaker, just this last year, over 960 Canadian graduate nurses have been hired by the Saskatchewan Health Authority. In addition to that, well, if they don't like the answer, Mr. Speaker. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, through our international recruitment, over 450 folks from the Philippines have been offered services. I understand about 170 of them are already offering services in a Saskatchewan community, maybe near them, Mr. Speaker, maybe in another area of this province, Mr. Speaker. And I would remind members opposite, because they never did take this opportunity when they were in government. It is only through fostering the strength and the growth of the Saskatchewan economy that we're able to continue to make those investments into our classrooms, into our healthcare system, Mr. Speaker, and into our communities more directly.
Recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier likes to talk about what's coming into the system, but he doesn't talk about the number of people who have left. Exactly. And under this Premier's watch, we've lost 474 rural registered nurses, Mr. Speaker, in this province. This tired and out-of-touch government is failing healthcare in so many ways. Just one of them is the over-reliance on contract agency nurses. Yeah. Earlier this week, the Saskatchewan Union of Nurses released new numbers showing that the Sask Party is on track to spend more than $70 million on contract agency nurses this year. Shame. Why is the Sask Party spending tens of millions of public dollars on contract nurses when they should be fixing retention for nurses that live in Saskatchewan? Exactly.
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, like many other provinces, we are investing to ensure that those services are delivered in our communities, Mr. Speaker, and alongside that, Mr. Speaker, investing heavily in hiring, and as per my last answer, over 1,300 nurses into our Saskatchewan Health Authority system, Mr. Speaker, servicing a community, Mr. Speaker, that many of us in this province represent. I find it interesting that the Deputy Leader talks about services and people that are leaving our system in our province, Mr. Speaker. When they had the opportunity to form government over 16 years, 22,000 people actually did leave this province, Mr. Speaker. Saskatchewan's fastest growing city was Calgary, Mr. Speaker. That's what our province looked like under the new Democratic government, Mr. Speaker. Thankfully, in 2007, there was a change that was made. 223,000 people have moved into Saskatchewan or chosen to stay here, Mr. Speaker. No longer are our students, our children getting luggage for a graduation present, Mr. Speaker. They're getting the graduate retention program to encourage them to find a job in the province of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, to stay in a community that maybe they were raised or another Saskatchewan community, Mr. Speaker, and to add to the opportunities that we will have for generations to come.
Recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
No answer to the question, Mr. Speaker. Exactly. Just falling back into the old fear-mongering statements, Mr. Speaker. Yeah. This tired and out-of-touch government isn't being transparent at all when it comes to the costs of contract nursing. I asked the Minister at committee for details on the total cost of these expensive nurse contracts and the names of the agencies being used. No answer. I followed up with the Minister almost a month ago by letter. Still, no answer. The annual reports for the SHA show that payments of staffing agencies have ballooned from $1.4 million in 2020 to at least $25 million in 2022. Why won't the Sask Party release some basic information about how much these costly nursing agencies are costing Saskatchewan people today?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And specific to the member's question, I understand my office has been trying to reach out to the member here today. Mr. Speaker, I would say that Saskatchewan, like other provinces, when necessary, is utilizing contract nurses when it's required to stabilize services and deliver those services, Mr. Speaker. And we're working very closely with the SHA and our partners to make sure that we are doing everything we can to fill vacancies, to make sure that we're permanently hiring hiring nurses in this province by creating a new permanent full-time positions in Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, I would say that currently 18,000 nurses of all designations call Saskatchewan home and are proud to be working in our healthcare system. We're very grateful for the work that they deliver in our province, Mr. Speaker. That number, 18,000 nurses in our province, Mr. Speaker, that is an increase of 5,000 nurses net over the 2007 numbers, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Regina University.
Mr. Speaker, the good people from the Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities are in town right now for their annual convention, and just minutes ago, our leader had the opportunity to speak to them about all the opportunity that exists in rural Saskatchewan, especially economic opportunity, because under this tired and out-of-touch government, rural Saskatchewan isn't getting ahead. In fact, it's falling behind. Mr. Speaker, under this Premier's watch, from 2018 till 2023, 40,600 jobs have been lost in rural Saskatchewan. That's 1 in 3 jobs lost. How can the Sask Party defend the records of lost jobs in rural Saskatchewan?
Recognize the Minister of Trade and Export Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Pretty rich from a party opposite whose idea of rural economic development was telling people to go fix their own roads, Mr. Speaker. The reality is that we have a strong economy and a bright future. The jobs report last week was incredibly positive, Mr. Speaker. Nearly 19,000 jobs that have been created, full-time jobs created over the course of the last year, a job every 28 minutes, Mr. Speaker. That means by the time question period is concluded, another job will have been created here in Saskatchewan. Many of those, Mr. Speaker, are in rural Saskatchewan. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, I can speak to that being from rural Saskatchewan. The members on this side can speak being to rural Saskatchewan, as opposed to the members opposite who represent a grand total of 0 rural municipalities in Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. In addition to that, we have some very, very exciting news on growing the economy going forward. A great announcement on investment attraction, reflecting the fact that we are seeing remarkable record amounts of capital investment into the province, something that literally never happened under the NDP.
Recognize the member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This government likes to talk a good game about rural Saskatchewan, but the numbers don't lie, Mr. Speaker, and Saskatchewan people care more about results than they do about that minister's feel-good story, and the results are in. Mr. Speaker, 40,600 jobs lost in rural Saskatchewan, 1 in 3 since this Premier came to office. How is that growth that works for everyone?
Recognize the Minister of Trade and Export Development.
Just another example, Mr. Speaker, constant negativity from the NDP, constant talking down of our economy, and constant, Mr. Speaker, not representing the fact that we are seeing tremendous job growth here in this province, Mr. Speaker. Hot off the press is a report from the Royal Bank of Canada, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to quote from, a larger than anticipated capital expenditure boost last year, just talked about that, and this is a quote, and an astounding takeoff in the labour market has prompted an upward revision of our 2023 growth forecast, Mr. Speaker. That's from RBC just yesterday afternoon that came out, a reflection that we're seeing in a labour market creating 19,000 full-time jobs last year, seeing nearly $19 billion of capital investment coming into the province this year. This is what pays for everything else, Mr. Speaker. This was the part the NDP never did get and never will get, Mr. Speaker. The way you are able to pay for education, the way you are able to make record investments in health is by attracting investment. That's what.
Recognize the member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is a government whose capital investment is 54% of what it was in 2014. The economy matters. As the famous saying goes, it's the economy, stupid. And Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government is taking rural Saskatchewan for granted. 40,600 jobs, and all they need to do is look at the facts, because it's not just jobs that they're losing, Mr. Speaker. Under this Premier's watch, since he came to office, 860 businesses have closed their doors in rural Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, how does this tired and out-of-touch government defend that Premier's record when it comes to nearly 1,000 businesses closing their doors for good?
Recognize the Minister of Trade and Export Development.
Well, Mr. Speaker, they want to talk about comparing records. I can't tell you how much I am happy to compare our record of 16 years in office versus their record of 16 years in office. It's a legitimate comparison, Mr. Speaker, one that member invited the comparison to. Over their time in office, Mr. Speaker, how many people moved to Saskatchewan? The answer is zero. Actually, the answer is less than zero because 20,000 people left Saskatchewan during their 16 years in office. What is our record, Mr. Speaker? Over 220,000 people made Saskatchewan their home. What was their record on jobs, Mr. Speaker? Their record on jobs in the course of 16 years was not just zero, Mr. Speaker, it was negative. It was negative. They destroyed jobs and opportunity in this province over their 16 years. Over our 16 years, Mr. Speaker, we created nearly 100,000 new jobs in this province. And how did we do that, Mr. Speaker? By creating the conditions for investment to flow to this province, something that they have never understood.
Recognize the member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is a government that refuses to talk about their own record. We talked about the record on health care yesterday. They didn't like that. We're talking about their failures in rural Saskatchewan today, and clearly they really don't like that, and it's a sign of how tired and out of touch this Sask Party government has become. They've changed. This version of the government never admits when they've made a mistake. They'll never change tack, they'll never apologize, and they'll never change course. But, Mr. Speaker, it is the people of this province who are paying the price. 40,000 jobs lost in rural Saskatchewan, 1,000 small businesses closed. Those people do not care about spin, they care about results. And the results show that this government is taking rural Saskatchewan for granted. Why can't this government show an ounce of humility when it comes to their record of failure for rural Saskatchewan?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Trade and Export Development.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think I canvassed the side-by-side records of the members opposite over their 16 years versus our 16 years, Mr. Speaker. It's a record that we are very, very proud of, Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House. And an economic record I am very comfortable putting to the people of this province because I know which side they're going to pick, Mr. Speaker. Another example of the things that we're doing, just this week, great positive news, the Indigenous business gathering that was held in Saskatoon, attended and led by the Premier, Trade and Export Development, Mr. Speaker, was the organizers of the event. Incredibly positive, an incredibly optimistic and forward-looking event that has 85 booths that were from Indigenous businesses, where we are seeing tremendous growth, Mr. Speaker, whether that be in the forestry sector that those members want to shut down, whether that be in the energy sector, which those members do not like, whether that be in uranium mining, which we know that members, their official position is to shut it all down, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we're going to continue to move forward on all of those fronts. We're going to continue to do that with our Indigenous people in this.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is long past time for this tired and out-of-touch government to get a deal with Saskatchewan teachers. It's time for that minister to stop playing games, to stop with the billboards, to stop with the Twitter videos, and to get a deal that addresses class size and complexity. Will the Minister of Education finally show some humility and sit down with teachers and get a deal done?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll remind the members opposite of a couple things that we announced last week out of our government, Mr. Speaker. First of all, the largest ever increase to school operating funding that the province has ever seen, Mr. Speaker. $180 million distributed that will be distributed to our 27 school divisions all across the province, Mr. Speaker. These are locally elected people that are ultimately going to make some great decisions for how we support students and teachers in our classrooms, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to the multi-year funding agreement, Mr. Speaker, that we signed last week with 27 boards, Mr. Speaker, That's going to take the classroom supports funding and guarantee that as a minimum for the next 4 years, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to bargaining, Mr. Speaker, we've offered a salary deal to the STF leadership that accounts for cost of living. We've offered the management of their own dental plan, Mr. Speaker. We've offered wording around violence in the workplace, Mr. Speaker. We have made offers, Mr. Speaker. It is time for the STF leadership to stop making excuses and get back to the table. That's what teachers, students, and families want in this province.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, everyone knows that this Minister of Education is failing. He is failing teachers, he's failing boards, and he's certainly failing students and families. Now that's clear from the people calling my office, and that's clear from the latest polls as well. 62% of Saskatchewan people think that this government is doing a bad job with our education system. So here's an idea. Will the minister look to what's worked in other provinces and pursue binding arbitration to get a deal done with Saskatchewan teachers?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, in my last answer, I outlined for the member opposite the several items where government has moved to make significant offers towards the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation leadership, as well as the people of this province, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to bargaining, Mr. Speaker, binding arbitration is not an option we're looking at, Mr. Speaker, and I'll tell you why. Because at the end of the day, Government Trustee Bargaining Committee has not even had the opportunity to have the Teachers Bargaining Committee at the table and discuss these issues. Government, people, students, families across the province, Mr. Speaker, expect the teachers' union leadership to bargain for more than half an hour over a 5-month period, Mr. Speaker. It is time for the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation leadership to stop making excuses to stay on strike and come back to the bargaining table and start looking for solutions.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Speaker, I would encourage that minister to give up with these empty talking points and get a deal done with teachers. There's the path. Unfortunately, this tired and out-of-touch government only have themselves to blame for the impasse in education bargaining. They're the ones that have taken Saskatchewan from one of the top funders in the country in per-student funding and dropped us to one of the last. They're the ones that have stripped local boards of their autonomy. And this minister is the one who refuses to get a deal done on class size and complexity. Instead, he's blaming teachers for wanting to be on strike. Enough is enough. Will the minister support getting a deal done with teachers through binding arbitration?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I can't speak for that member opposite, but if he's going to refer to the largest ever increase in school operating funding and a significant multi-year funding agreement, Mr. Speaker, that we have signed with all 27 school divisions as empty talking points for education, that's disappointing, Mr. Speaker. These are real announcements, Mr. Speaker, that show that this government is serious about getting a deal done for teachers, students, and families. But, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the topic of bargaining, I think the people of this province deserve a lot better than the Teachers Bargaining Committee only coming to the bargaining table for half an hour over the last 5 months, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is time. It is time for that union leadership to come back to the bargaining table, start looking for solutions. That's what we're trying to do, Mr. Speaker. We hope they'll come back.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon-Meewasin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. 74 lives have been lost due to overdoses in January and February of this year alone. 476 families lost loved ones to overdoses last year. This impacts families in every corner of our province, including my constituency. The government's decision to remove harm reduction supports and cut the things that will keep people alive is only going to lead to more lives lost to overdose. When will this Sask Party government listen to those on the front lines and come up with a real, evidence-based plan that will save lives and prevent those overdoses?
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said many times, and I will say again, every loss of life
due to an overdose is a tragedy in this province, and that is why our government is committed to helping people overcome their addictions by supporting recovery, Mr. Speaker, so that individuals can live healthy lives in recovery. And by doing that, Mr. Speaker, we will save lives, we will heal families, and we will strengthen communities in Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, no illicit drugs are safe. And that's a message that we need to get out to the public so that they understand that there is no safe consumption of an illicit drug, Mr. Speaker. The message that we are sending to the people of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, is that there is hope in recovery and there is help available through treatment. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, we are creating more addictions treatment spaces. We are making it easier for people to access those spaces, and we are wrapping supports around them through recovery-oriented systems of care while they are in the system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ministerial statements, introduction of bills, presenting reports by standing and special committees, orders of the day.
Questions. Question number 1 asked by Ms. Mowat.
I recognize the government whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to order question 1.
Question 1 has been ordered.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 1, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 152, the Protection from Human Trafficking Coerced Debts Amendment Act 2023 is called.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Centre.
Miigwech, Mr. Speaker, it is an honor to enter my remarks into this debate on Bill 152, the Protection from Human Trafficking Coerced Debts Amendment Act 2023.
Takes all kinds of
This act, this amendment, gives the summary of this bill essentially is the court can order the return of money and property obtained as part of a coerced debt, and it can't be subtracted. It can't subtract that from any dollars awarded for damages. So this bill is looking at protecting victims from human trafficking, and in particular on coerced debt that they may be in from the individual that is bringing this horrible harm to them. I want to talk about how this government talks continually about protecting the most vulnerable. You know, when I read through this, initially I was excited. I thought, this is good. We have many women, vulnerable women that are targeted. And when we look at human trafficking, how many vulnerable women are targeted? And all we have to do is look at what happened back in November with one of the MLAs that was charged in a human trafficking sting. When that happened, and I spoke about this in the House when I was first elected, about what actually happens out in the community with people looking, or men in particular, looking to buy sex. You know, I lived here 30-some years ago, and when I was a young woman, used to be circled with my little baby. And I had, my intent here to what I say is not to offend anyone, but just to speak truth, that I would have old white men circling me to pick me up, even when I had a baby. you know, and how many times I've seen people, young girls I grew up with, be targeted. And this is a reality for me as a visible Indigenous woman, that I see people that I know. They're not just numbers. They're individuals that I know that are targeted and are put on the streets and are violated in the most horrific ways. You know, and many of these women do not have the ability to get loans, you know, because they are living in poverty. And when this was presented, I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to delve into this, because I thought, you know, this government is taking a step to protect the most vulnerable. You know, and often it is Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit. So I was initially excited, and I thought, okay, how many of the women and girls that I know are able to get loans, can afford to get loans? So often I find governments put pieces of legislation without really giving thought to the bills that we present. Who are they actually protecting? No, and I think about what happened in November with that sting, that human trafficking sting. And I told, and I said in this House, and also with my own colleagues, that what's going to happen is, because it's a first-time offense, that individual will not have a criminal record if they went to an alternative program like the John School. All they have to do that is complete that. And I think of how many vulnerable women, young women, that are not protected by the laws that we make. They're not protected. And while it is the intention to do some things, we don't take it further when we create laws to protect the most vulnerable. How many Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit go missing and are put on the street and are forced to make money for somebody else and are hurt each and every day they're put out on those streets? So I think it's important when we're looking at protecting, and in this case, many, many women, that we have to look at who else. It's not just those that have the means. It's often those that are most vulnerable that are exploited. And we have to work with those organizations that keep or advocate for the most vulnerable. When I worked in Saskatoon, worked with young girls where they were working to try and get off the streets because many of them were coerced into prostitution. You know, and many of them were young girls, young girls that had absolutely no chance. So when I think about this bill, Bill 152, the protection from human trafficking, we have to protect those young people. We have to protect those women. And often it is those most vulnerable that do not have the means, that are trying to live today, that we have to think about. It was very triggering for me the first day of our sitting here on March 4th, to have the MLA, the member address the House and say, I apologize for what I almost did. It was very triggering for me as a First Nation woman who also has been a grandmother and was circled when I first became an MLA by an old white man trying to pick me up. It was very triggering to have somebody that was charged in human trafficking not apologize to the women that are often the target of human trafficking. So I think, Mr. Speaker, while the government continues to pat itself on the back for amending bills and saying this is what we're going to do, it's still not getting to the ones that are most vulnerable. And those are the ones we have to protect. Those are the ones we have to give voice to. And it's an honor as a legislator and as a First Nation woman to be able to talk and enter my remarks on bills like this, especially those that impact my people. So with this, while on one hand I'm happy that the government is making attempts at protecting those that are most vulnerable, I think this government has to push itself. All governments have to push themselves to do right, to make the right decisions, to help the ones that are most vulnerable, and to create programming and supports to give those vulnerable people, vulnerable women and girls, a chance at life so that they too can aspire, if they do so wish to, be in a position, in a privileged position that I'm in today as an elected MLA, to give those women hope that somebody, governments, are protecting them and that they're creating supports. My colleagues have spoken so eloquently about this, and I'm grateful. And I know that my colleagues on this side, we know, we have the pulse of the communities that we serve, the constituents, and many of the constituents that we serve in many of our constituencies are vulnerable women, are vulnerable girls that are being targeted for human trafficking, sex trafficking. So with that, I'm not going to say any more. I've said enough. But we can't just let up and say, yes, this is what we're doing. We have to dig deeper. We have to stop with the superficialness of what we present and get down to what legislation are we putting forward that's actually going to meaningfully impact the people that elected us, so that they too can join in a meaningful way in society. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm prepared to have this bill moved to committee. Miigwech.
The question before the Assembly is a motion by the Minister that Bill number 152 be now read a second time. It is a pleasure, Assembly, to adopt the motion. Carried.
Second reading of this bill.
To which committee shall this bill be committed? I recognize the Government House Leader.
To the Standing Committee on Intergovernmental Affairs and Justice.
The This bill stands committed to the Standing Committee on Intergovernmental Affairs and Justice.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 2, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 153, the Miscellaneous Municipal Statutes Amendment Act 2023. Ms. Saar.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Centre.
Miigwech, Mr. Speaker, it's now I have to do a complete shift. So I'm pleased to rise to speak to enter my comments into the debate on Bill 153, the Miscellaneous Municipal Statutes Amendment Act. So this act is it changes from the 3 acts of Cities Act, Municipals Act, and Northern Municipalities Act. So these are changes to these 3 acts, and basically the amendments are the boards of revision, and they're accountable for the boards are accountable to the municipal councils, not the minister. So it's good to see that this moving away from being accountable to the minister to the municipalities, etc. It's unfortunate that the Marshall bill that was proposed and the bill that was brought forward is actually doing the reverse, where people report to the minister. And this municipalities Municipal Statutes Amendment Act is actually doing the opposite, which it should be. It should be at that ground level where the community folks are. So I know that the critic for our critic for this area has been reaching out to the municipalities and also the hamlets and the stakeholders to ask their input on this and to consult with them and have a two-way dialogue with those impacted communities. And I guess one of the things that I think about and wonder about is the oversight, so how that would look, and I'm sure that my colleague whose critic area this is will ask those questions and also would have that opportunity to ask more questions in committee. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm prepared to have Bill 153, the Miscellaneous Municipal Statutes Amendment Act, prepared to move the bill to committee.
Question before the Assembly is a motion by the Minister that Bill number 153 be now read a second time. Is the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried.
Second reading of this bill.
To which committee shall this bill be committed? I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Standing Committee on Intergovernmental Affairs and Justice.
This bill stands committed to the Standing Committee on Intergovernmental Affairs and Justice.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 3, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 154, the Management and Reduction of Greenhouse Gases Amendment Act 2023. Ms. Saar.
Recognize the member from Regina Walsh Acres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to be on my feet to enter into debate on Bill number 154, the Management and Reduction of Greenhouse Gas Amendment Act 2023. We've been busy discussing with stakeholders across the province who will be impacted by this amendment. We continue to have those conversations and are getting some great feedback on pros and cons of the bill. I look forward to engaging in the committee work that is ahead for this bill, but I just want to reiterate the Saskatchewan New Democrats are certainly committed to acting on climate change, to making sure we are reducing our emissions in this province, and certainly concerned about the potential impacts that we're seeing from climate change in the province. Things like the drought, what that will mean for our agricultural producers, whether it's those who livestock producers or grain producers. Also worried about the potential wildfire season that we are about to embark on, mainly because of the reduced snowfall in the north in the boreal forest. And we have myself, along with my colleagues from Regina Douglas Park and Regina University, have sent a letter to the Minister of Public Safety asking how the province is preparing for the potential of a very severe wildfire season. We look forward to hearing back from the Minister on how they are planning for potential evacuations, potential increases in crop insurance payouts, that kind of thing. And I look forward to hearing back from them on that. With that, Mr. Speaker, I will conclude my remarks and look forward to discussing the bill more in committee. Thank you.
The question before the Assembly is a motion by the Minister that Bill number 154 be now read a second time. Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Is it a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried.
Second reading of this bill.
To which committee shall this bill be committed? I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I designate that Bill 154, the Management and Reduction of Greenhouse Gases Amendment Act, be referred to the Standing Committee on the Economy.
This bill stands committed to the Standing Committee on the Economy. Recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that this House do now adjourn.
The Government House Leader has moved to adjourn the House. It is a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried. This House now stands adjourned till 10 a.m. tomorrow.